All right, let's jump right into a really wild thought experiment. What would happen if you took today's generation, Gen Z, with all their tech, all their values, and just dropped them right into the middle of a 20th century dictatorship?
And look, this isn't just some fun what-if game. It's a way to get at a much bigger question, right? Has technology completely changed what it means to be young? And what does that mean when you're up against the age-old threat of tyranny?
Well, the answer, and this is what's so fascinating, is a total paradox. The very things that define Gen Z, they make them uniquely prepared to resist and, at the exact same time, uniquely vulnerable to it. Let's dig into that.
Okay, so first up, let's really get to know our main characters here. Who exactly is Gen Z? I mean, they're basically a walking bundle of contradictions, shaped by a world that's always on and, frankly, always in crisis.
You know, some people call them the true Gen, and it's because their number one non-negotiable value is authenticity. They have this incredible BS detector for anything that seems fake or overly polished. And you mix that with this worldview of just radical inclusivity. For them, diversity isn't some goal to strive for. It's just how the world is. It's the starting point. And all of that is built on a foundation of being super pragmatic and really, really not trusting the old school institutions.
And here's where we hit that first big paradox. You'd think, as the first true digital natives, they'd be totally immune to online manipulation, right? But that's not what the data shows. In fact, they can actually be more vulnerable to really sophisticated fake news. Why? Well, think about where they get their info. These super fast-paced, totally unregulated social media feeds. And that skepticism, it's a huge part of who they are. You look at their trust in the big institutions, government, news media, corporations, and it's just rock bottom. But this isn't your typical teenage rebellion. It's actually a pretty rational reaction from a generation that grew up with a front row seat to financial meltdowns, political chaos, and constant social upheaval. When you look at their mental health, they report the highest levels of anxiety of any generation. But, and this is key, that anxiety doesn't paralyze them. Nope, it actually fuels this really pragmatic drive to get out there and find real, tangible solutions to the problems they see all around them.
All right, so that's Gen Z. Now let's bring in the antagonist. To figure out how the showdown would go, we really need to understand the playbook of a regime like Nazi Germany. What were their exact tactics?
So, the Nazi propaganda machine, it was never about winning an intellectual debate. It was about pure, raw, emotional manipulation. And it basically had 4 main steps. Step 1, find a scapegoat. Take every complex problem in society and blame it on one single group. Step 2, build the Führer Myth. Create this image of a perfect, infallible, almost godlike leader. Step 3, use super simple emotional slogans and just repeat them over and over and over. And finally, step 4, control everything. The media, the schools, the youth groups. Create a totally closed information bubble where no other ideas can get in.
And just to be clear, none of this was an accident. Hitler literally wrote it down in Mein Kampf. The whole strategy was designed to completely bypass a person's critical thinking and hit them right in their most basic emotions.
So, we have our 21st century protagonist and our 20th century antagonist. What happens when these two forces collide? This is the real core of our whole question.
Okay, this chart really breaks it down, where Gen Z's strengths and weaknesses lie. So on one hand, their digital savvy would be amazing for bypassing state-controlled media, big advantage. But on the flip side, that anti-establishment message from the Nazis railing against a corrupt government, that would probably land really well with a generation that already has zero trust in institutions. And then there's their love of short, bite-sized content. That habit lines up almost perfectly, and dangerously, with the simple, repetitive slogans of propaganda.
Now think about their reaction to the whole Führer myth. Picture Gen Z watching one of those huge, theatrical, over-the-top rallies. Their finely tuned authenticity radar would be screaming. The reaction wouldn't be awe or inspiration, it would be pure mockery. In their world, there's a perfect word for it, cringe. They wouldn't be saluting, they'd be turning it into a viral meme. But here is the absolute deal breaker, the ideological clash. The Nazi obsession with racial purity is the complete 180-degree opposite of Gen Z's core belief in radical inclusivity. On that point, there is zero room for compromise. Their rejection of that kind of racism would be instant, gut-level, and total.
And look, this isn't all just theoretical. We can actually pivot from this what-if scenario and look at how Gen Z is already operating on the world stage, because their actions today give us some huge clues.
I mean, we've seen this playbook in the real world. Think about the Hong Kong protests. Completely leaderless, fluid, organized on encrypted apps, and totally overwhelming the authorities. Or in Natal, where online trends literally exploded into a real-world movement that brought down a government. And of course, massive movements like Black Lives Matter and Fridays for Future have shown just how powerful they are at using digital tools to drive the global conversation.
And this gets us to the really tricky dilemma of our time. The exact same social media platforms that are these incredible tools for liberation are now also powerful tools for repression. It's a double-edged sword. For every activist using their phone to organize a protest, there's a government agent using it for surveillance, unleashing bots, and just flooding the internet with disinformation.
Which leads us to maybe their single biggest challenge. Gen Z is absolutely brilliant at creating what you might call an ephemeral crisis for a regime. A sudden, massive viral protest. But because their movements are so often leaderless, they find it really hard to turn that moment of protest into lasting institutional power. They are fantastic at starting the fire, but they often struggle with the slow, difficult work of what comes next. So, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with one final, really critical question. It seems like Gen Z is almost perfectly built to fight the propaganda war of the last century. But is that the war we're actually fighting today? Or is the new battlefield, this world of AI, secret algorithms, and sophisticated digital manipulation, a war that they are, in fact, uniquely vulnerable to? That's the big question to chew on. Thanks for tuning in.